Hello, I'm Anawultus, and today I will be telling you about my particular position on LGBTQIA plus issues. So, to help me in that, I've got the New York Times here from a 2018 article. So, this is relatively recent. For some people, perhaps not recent enough to give me their definitions, and I will be working on that. So, just to tell you full disclosure, maybe perhaps a slight trigger warning to some of you. I um, I do have some relatively what one might call conservative positions on these issues. However, I also want to say that I do not have any ill will in the sense that I do not wish any harm to come upon anybody that is of a different position than mine. I think it's always best when we can openly express our ideas and discuss them, and I think that that's a lot better than having some form of suppression when it concerns the exchange of ideas. So I ask that in the comment section, anybody that has anything to say, please be polite and civil to one another, just for the general purpose of equality of a discussion. So, anyway, let's dive right in. So, I'm just going to be looking at the definitions part of this article. So, of course, gay and lesbian, and I'll just be reading it real quick. It's important to start with the basics, and gay and lesbian are as basic as it gets, as homosexual began to feel clinical and pejorative. Although, to be fair, I'm going to say uh, homosexual, from my perspective at least, as someone who is linguistically inclined, it I can't really imagine it being pejorative, but I can understand that if it maybe has a cultural connotation, perhaps that it might be considered pejorative. But I personally prefer to use it as the technical term rather than saying gay and lesbian. I think it's easier for me to just use one word. But there you go. Gay became the de rigueur mainstream term to refer to same sex attraction in the late 1960s and early 70s, gradually as what was then called the gay liberation movement gained steam. The phrase gay and lesbian became more popular as a way to highlight the similar yet separate issues faced by women in the fight for tolerance. Gay is still sometimes used as an umbrella term, but these days it also refers specifically to men, as in gay men and lesbians. Okay, so I think so. The my main anchoring point for my positions on these issues is, of course, my religious positions, and people who have watched the latest episode of the Anawultus and Murad podcast will know that uh, I and he have different positions when it concerns this, and we agree to disagree, and we also can still interact without being rude to each other. So I just want to emphasize once again, let's have that type of discussion. But I'm going to say that yes, this is for me a religious issue, because the way I view ethics and the epistemology of ethics, or how do we know what the ethical standards are, I see it as a bit of a hierarchy of ethics. So, in the sense that at the top, you have the theological ethics, then you go to the philosophical, and then to the political. And the higher one, the theological ethic, is the one that wins out. Now, of course, in order to take that particular position, you would have to believe that your religion is a true religion. So individuals who are simply trying to be somewhat spiritual, or who are just culturally religious, certainly will maybe skip the top step there. But again, I am a lesser signatory of the Nashville Statement. Just if anybody wants, you can look at that, and that'll have some generalized positions that I hold to. I read every single position on there, and I signed it at the end um, because I agreed. But anyway, my particular position is that homosexuality, whether it be gay or lesbian, is morally wrong. And you may ask then, why is it morally wrong? And the answer is complicated. But the first and the easiest thing to say would be uh, God says you shouldn't do it. And that may, for some people, be enough, but I think that on a philosophical level, that really is maybe the plainest understanding. As in, what I'm saying here is that there's a deeper understanding of these issues when you read the Bible. So beyond that, you actually read into why does God say these things, and what God says, or if you want to be specific to the literature, what Moses writes about God is that to God it is an abomination. Now, what is an abomination? An abomination is the peak of disgust. So, abomination is when you vomit out. That's how disgusting it is to you, that you actually disgorge and you vomit. And of course, this is an anthropomorphism because it also says God is a spirit. So it's not as if he's physically vomiting at the existence of homosexuality. No, but it is something that displeases God. And the ultimate standard of ethics when it concerns Christianity is that things that please God are good, and things that displease God are bad. And you may ask, is there something beyond that? Is there a standard above God that you could call to? And the answer is no, not in Christianity. In Christianity, God is the standard of right and wrong, and it is the decision of God, or to be more exact, the character of God, because God is unchanging, that then defines the ultimate right and wrong in all of existence. So, therefore, if it is something that disgusts God, then it is ultimately wrong in any situation. But then you may ask, is there more to this? And this particularly then relates to the issue of gay marriage. Um, so if we assume that homosexuality is already wrong, however, we also acknowledge that from a Christian perspective, the marriage of individuals who are not Christians is still considered to be a valid marriage, because marriage, although it is something that, according to Christianity, was originally instituted by God, it is a gift, an institution that God has established among humans, and marriage is therefore respected even by Christians among non-Christians. You may ask, then, if someone who's not a Christian were to get married in a homosexual marriage, as in a marriage between two individuals of the same sex, is that ethically wrong according to Christianity? And I would have to say the answer is yes, because what we see is, what is the purpose of marriage in the Christian ethic? And the purpose of marriage in the Christian ethic is twofold. The first purpose of marriage is, and I would say the higher purpose, or the more spiritual purpose of marriage, is the establishment of a relationship that is a prototype of a relationship between Jesus Christ and the church. And So this is also why men and women are not only sexually dimorphic in a reproductive sense, but also in other ways as well, which leads to behavioral differences. According to the Christian cosmology, as derived from the Christian ethic, as derived from the things that we observe in the world and what is written in the Bible. So, therefore, I take a complementarian view that men and women form a more ideal marriage, or actually an ideal marriage, as opposed to, let's say, two men or two women. And then you go on to a bit further, and you can talk about the responsibilities that men have towards the women that they have married, and that women have towards the men that they have married. And there is responsibilities on both sides there. So it's not supposed to be a sort of a chattel slavery kind of thing like some people characterize it. That's not what Christians generally believe. But then the second component to the purpose of marriage is the physical purpose of marriage, and that is the reproductive purpose. And if, therefore, you enter into a marriage that marriage, essentially, what it does in a very physical sense is that it provides a way wherein a network of mutual responsibility between two individuals that then allows for a safe environment for reproduction uh, by means of copulation, as well as the raising of offspring. And this is sociologically true in the sense that we do see that children that are raised with having two parents are generally considered to be more well adjusted than children being raised by a single parent. Although there are exceptions to this, there are people that, despite having what I would consider a slight disadvantage, that can still rise above that and do just as well, if not better. So I'm not saying that this is determinative to the character of a child, but but you may say, well, and what about, let's say you have two parents but they're the same sex, and this is again where the idea of the complementarianism comes in, where men and women are generally not going to attempt to raise their children in the exact same way, because men and women are in fact different in very defined ways that of course by various means there are some areas where the exact roughness or the exact definition is a little bit blurry as to what are all these things that women do and what are all these things that men do, because there are some men that are more effeminate and there are some women that are a bit more masculine. So I'm not saying that these are two solid ideals and that everyone else that is just 1 millimeter outside of this ideal is somehow uh, abnormal or dysfunctional. That's not what I'm saying. Um, but what I am saying is that I do believe that the reproductive ability in a marriage is important for the actual integrity and the validity of the marriage. However, That being said, on a political sense, because I've been speaking about the religious and philosophical levels so far, but I haven't really been talking about the political level here yet. Um, in a political sense, I don't think, in my opinion, that the government should be regulating marriage. In other words, although I am against gay marriage in a very religious sense, I am not against it in a political sense. And therefore, I would say that although I consider it ultimately to be a moral evil, I do not consider it to be something that is completely destructive to how society functions in this world. So, that being said, I would say that if I had my way, the government wouldn't really be regulating marriage at all in any way, and you wouldn't need to ask permission in the United States anyway to get married. Um, at the same time, I say that because the government does regulate marriage, that for that reason, I do believe that I do oppose homosexual marriage in a specific society in which marriage is regulated. However, in a society in which marriage is not regulated, I do not oppose homosexuality on a political level. However, I will discourage it from a religious and a philosophical standpoint. In other words, I'm not actually willing to take violent or aggressive action against individuals who want to get married in that way, although I do oppose it. But what I say is that it's not my job to judge every single uh, sin that anybody does in their lives. I think that Jesus Christ is my judge and the judge of the whole world, and that's who I and everyone else is eventually going to have to answer to. But going back again to the idea of the government regulating the morality of marriage, because it is a moral statement in the sense that it's regulated. Because, for example, regulation in the United States has made it so that polygamy is generally illegal. And what actual problem does the government particularly have with polygamy when it concerns a level of liberty? And the answer is it doesn't actually pose any threat to public safety or to liberty. What it is a moral assessment. That's why that has been banned. And the same thing with all sorts of different laws. So I say that if we are making this moral statement that we are going to regulate marriage, I think that on that side I have to oppose homosexual marriage. But if we are not going to regulate that, then my hands are off. Laissez-faire. That's what I say. But anyway, let's move on. Bisexual. Someone who is attracted to people of their gender or other genders. It is not a way station from straight or gay as it had once been described. The stereotypes around bisexuality, that it's a transitional stage or a cover for promiscuity, have been at the center of fraught conversation within LGBTQ circles for years. And there's a link, I guess, to Straight, Gay, or Lying Bisexuality Revisited. The musical television show Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, which features a bisexual male character, had an entire song refuting this. As advocates speak out more about what they see as bisexual erasure, the persistent questioning of negation of bisexual identity, the term has become resurgent. But some people also argue that the prefix bi reinforces a male-female gender binary that isn't inclusive enough. And I say that if you're going to say that there's such a thing as heterosexuality and homosexuality, that those statements in themselves also imply a binary. But when it concerns bisexuals, I understand that there's different kinds of bisexuals, as this article is trying to explain here. There are individuals who are sort of there are individuals who are sort of in between, that may want to go one way or the other. There are individuals who are fine with either but are monogamous, and then there are people who actually would prefer a type of polygamy where they want both. So you've got the and the or situation, and then you've got the who knows situation on the other side. So there's a mix of individuals that are considered bisexual. But again, on the same note with homosexuality, my opinion is going to be the same regarding bisexuality, simply for the same reasons as homosexuality. So I don't think I've got anything new in particular to say about bisexuality that I haven't already said about homosexuality. Pansexual, someone who is attracted to people of all gender identities, or someone who is attracted to a person's qualities regardless of their gender identity. Okay, once a more niche term used by academics, pansexual has entered the mainstream, pushed in part by celebrities bringing it visibly. The singer Miley Cyrus identified as pansexual in 2015, in April, after the singer, is this a French singer? Janelle Monáe? Okay, I apologize if I mispronounced that. Came out as pansexual in a Rolling Stone article. Searches for the word on Merriam-Webster's website rose 11,000%. So that's the amount it rose. Wow, that's quite a lot, according to the dictionary. So on pansexual, again, same issue relating to homosexuality, but I am gonna say that I am a binary normative person, in the sense that I do believe that the binary is a normative and, in fact, proper existence when it concerns this present physical world, in the sense that I believe that this is in some way biological essential. In essence, I believe that the sex that you have, your actual sex, is of course physically linked at a genetic level, and that your gender is well, we're going to be talking about that in a little while. But again, same issue here, and also I am pro-binary because of, again, I have a complementarian attitude, and that of course requires or is more logically consistent with a binary viewpoint of this. As I do believe that it is genetically true. I don't think that that is refutable, but we're going to get into that in a few minutes here coming down the line. Asexual, or ace, someone who experiences little or no sexual attraction. They are not to be confused with aromantic people who experience little or no romantic attraction. Asexual people do not always identify as aromantic. Aromantic people do not always identify as asexual. I don't particularly see anything morally wrong with asexuality. I, however, will say that if there is one choice, in my opinion, it is between sexual and non-sexual. There you go. Not necessarily asexual, but you can be. I think you can be heterosexual without being sexually active. It may sound weird to say, but I think that that's a fair statement to make. because otherwise, when you then enter into the question of what about gay children, you might say, are they sexually active? And then it becomes really weird. So I do believe you can have a sexual orientation without being sexually active. However, individuals who have no sexual orientation or no sexual drive whatsoever, I don't see anything particularly wrong with that. At least not at this time, anyway. Cisgender, someone whose gender identity matches the sex they were assigned at birth. Now, the first time I heard about this, it sounded kind of weird, or maybe I should say it's kisgender, but maybe that's getting a bit too Latin there. But anyway, of course, this all comes from the theory when it concerns gender, that gender is a social construct, uh, and sex is the some people consider it to be biological. Other people also consider it to be somehow a social construct as well. At which point they say, "Well, what about biology anywhere? Where do we get? When do we get back to the biology?" But again, the gender, of course, the way I see it is your internal, how you internalize your your sexuality, because gender also comes from a similar root of generate. So from my etymological perspective, to me, when I read it, just because of my linguistic knowledge, it implies biology, just simply because of the formation of the word. But I know that that's not what people mean. um, but anyway, I think that I'm actually not 100% pro cisgender. And you may say, whoa, that's a weird turning point from your previous statement so far. And that's because I consider the people having what I would refer to as the proper gender and the improper gender. And what that means is that I believe that people should have their gender conform to their sex. And that's, of course, is going to be a very controversial statement to a lot of people. But I do believe that that is, in my opinion, the healthiest solution here, because I, on nature versus nurture side, when it concerns gender, I do agree that gender is something that can be nurtured to some extent, but I believe that sex is something that is natural, and therefore I think that the healthiest expression is to conform your gender to your sex. And some people find it hard in the sense that, does this mean that I believe that people should choose who they love? And the answer is yes. I believe that that is indeed possible, and that anybody is capable of choosing who they want to love and choosing who they don't want to love. And and I think that that's actually very important. Um, a very important aspect of self-control and full actualization as a mature human being is the actual ability of making such choices. Um, I know that there are some people that disagree on that, though. Transgender, a wide ranging term for people whose gender identity or gender expression differs from their biological sex they were assigned at birth. Um, and again, when you say biological sex they were assigned at birth, that's not really a coherent statement, because that's assuming that your sex is something that is somehow assigned. I think a better term is that your sex is something that is scientifically discovered by observation of your biology, because there's no other way that you could have a sex in some way being biological other than it arising from your biology. I think that that's a coherent statement for me to make, and that statement there is a bit incoherent. What I think they should have said is an expression that differs from the biological sex that they were determined to be at birth, because then it's a bit more neutral between our positions of whether it is assigned or discovered. Um, but anyway, um, again, I think that it is unhealthy to operate in a gender dysphoria. Um, and there are two different solutions that people think for gender dysphoria. One is to take the gender over the sex, and that is that they encourage individuals to maybe have a sex change, to take hormones, to do this, that, or the other thing, to change their behavior. The other one, which is the position I take, is that the sex is the position that you should take as opposed to the gender, that uh, you need to, in essence, if you are a man, but you feel like you are becoming a woman, or that you are a woman, or that for some reason you want to be a woman, that you, for lack of a better term, need to in some way man up. And I'm not saying that in a necessarily uh, crass way, in the sense that, oh, you're a sissy or something. No, I'm not trying to be rude here. What I'm saying is that there it is healthier to be someone that conforms to your biology than someone who rebels against your biology. And when it, especially when it concerns reproduction, the sexual dimorphism of humans is of course particularly related to the sexual reproduction, and that of course it is to me tied then together with the idea of marriage. And then you also have the complementarianism. So you take all those things together, and I don't believe that a sex change operation is the ideal solution to gender dysphoria. And in fact, I would say that the high suicide rate that we see is in some ways correlated with this idea that it is in fact probably harmful in many times to do that. So I also view transgender as essentially being opposed to your status as either a man or a woman. Um, but then transgendered, not a word often used as one. Okay. I think I can't really say that. Okay, that's not how words work. You can't say that, oh, someone uses a word but it's not a word. That's not how it works. That's not how words begin to exist. It's not that someone has to put it in a dictionary. Transgendered is a verb, okay? Or it can be an adjective. It can be an adverb. To transgender, transgendered, was transgendered. Those are real words, okay? I'm saying this as the authority when it concerns the English language, as an authority when it concerns the English language. Transgendered is officially a word. Deal with it. By the way, that part is kind of joking, but I am serious on that. Trans or trans plus, two umbrella terms for non-cisgender identities. Gender nonconforming or GNC, one who expresses gender outside traditional norms associated with masculinity or femininity. Not all gender nonconforming people are transgender, and some transgender people express gender in conventionally masculine or feminine ways. And of course, similar to the previous points on that, um, there you do have a biology, and of course, being a male and intentionally behaving in a way that is female is, in my opinion, something that is in some ways dishonest, in the sense that we as a society have established communication parameters, and then you are taking those communication parameters and using them to, in essence, show the opposite of what they mean, which in a communication sense would be a lie. But I'm not saying that everyone is doing this, by the way. I'm just saying that this is something that does happen in some instances. Non-binary, a person who identifies as neither male nor female and sees themselves outside the gender binary. This is sometimes shortened to NB or NB. One notable example, Taylor Mason, a financial analyst on the show Billions, was believed to be the first gender non-binary character on television, as played by the non-binary actor Asia Kate Dillon. Okay. Again, I do believe that there is a binary and that it is instituted by God and is important in a very sociological sense. Genderqueer, another term used to describe someone whose gender identity is outside the strict male-female binary. They may exhibit both traditionally masculine and feminine qualities, or neither. Again, same points there. Gender fluid, a term used by people whose identity shifts or fluctuates. Sometimes these individuals may identify or express themselves as more masculine on some days and more feminine on others. And I'm not entirely sure on or sold on the idea of identity being something that you can just change from day to day. If that's what you define yourself by, I think you need to probably find something a bit more solid to define yourself by rather than that. Gender neutral, someone who prefers not to be described by a specific gender but prefers they as a singular pronoun, the American Dialect Society's 2015 Word of the Year, or the honorific mix, a substitute for Mr. or Mrs. that entered the Oxford English Dictionary in 2015. Now, I will say this, I generally do not prefer using they as a singular pronoun, simply because it's not a singular pronoun. However, if you want to use a neutral personal pronoun, the word he is just fine. And you may say, no, that's not true. It is true. That's how English works. If you don't know whether someone is male or female in a situation, you might say he. That's generally how it works in the English language. And I also do not approve of using the term it, as that is non-personal. MAAB, MFAAB, UAAB, male assigned at birth, female assigned at birth, unassigned at birth. And again, I believe that gender and sex should be linked, and that sex is biologically essential, and therefore gender, while being something that can be constructed, is ideally linked to the biology. And therefore, when I say ideal, I'm not saying that there should be other options. What I'm saying is that this is the right option, and then there are incorrect options. Intersex, a term for someone born with biological sex characteristics that aren't traditionally associated with male or female bodies. Intersexuality does not refer to sexual orientation or gender identity. So this is one that I do not disapprove of. because this is an actual biological reason why someone is different. So all these other ones are sociological for in large part, and but this one, intersex, is actually biological, and from a position of biological essentialism when it concerns to your sex, I would have to say that this is okay. Now, that being said, I also see this as non-ideal, in the sense that I believe it to, just like, let's say someone has a cleft palate, it is a situation that, while it's not a lethal problem, it is a non ideal morphology of the human body. And in the same way, a lot of these individuals who are intersex are, for example, many of them, not all of them, okay, there's many different kinds of intersex. I'm very well aware of this. I have studied this. You've got XXYY, you've got XXY, you've got people that have are not functionally at all sexually. So you've got things like that, and I do see these as non-ideal. And the reason I can see these as non-ideal is because I have an ideal, and that is the creation of God, and that is what I consider to be the ideal, and from which I base various things. Now, what I'm not saying is that intersex individuals are bad people. I'm not saying that intersex individuals are in some way inferior in any social sense. That's not at all what I'm saying. What I am saying is that their bodies did not form in the proper way. And I don't think that's very controversial to say biologically, that there is such a thing as proper formation of a human body and improper formation of a human body, especially on a genetic level. But there you go. So again, at the end of this, let me just emphasize again, I do not wish any murder or assault or rape or theft or vandalism to occur to any of the individuals that I have mentioned here that I disagree with. And I also want to say that I am fully willing to be polite to individuals, regardless of who they are, that come into contact with me with one way or another. Well, when it concerns the question of hate, I don't really think that I can properly say that I could hate someone who's a stranger to me. The only reason I really hate anyone is if someone really does something that's in some way becomes personal to me, and in that case, I still prefer not to hate individuals. In fact, there are individuals that have done some great injustices to me, and I do not hate those individuals. So, by the way, these individuals have nothing to do with the LGBT issues. I'm just referring to this just to emphasize here that I am not coming out of a position of hate, but rather a position of disapproval of various ideological and sociological positions and philosophical positions that many individuals hold. And I think that it's important to have an open dialogue when it concerns these things. So thank you all for watching, and I hope that this was informative as to my particular opinions when it concerns these issues. And if you have anything to say in the comments section, I would be happy to hear it. But I will be seeing you all next time. Anna Wiltus over and out.